legislative districts have to be drawn with equal populations, but ever since it's wrestled with questions of what's fair to draw in terms of majority-minority districts on a racial basis, but also how partisan gerrymandering should be allowed or deterred.
The word can first be found in America printed in the Boston Gazette in March of 1812, when Governor Elbridge Gerry signed a bill that redistricted Massachusetts to benefit his political party. Because the eventual district drawn was shaped like a salamander, and using the governor's first name, we have the birth of gerrymander. The practice is still in use today, and as a matter of fact is a key to the plan of many politicians. But come the presidential election of 2016 and beyond, the Supreme Court may see to it that the concept rather becomes a thing of the past, despite some who say it's still necessary to ensure an election that truly represents certain people in a certain district. So let's unravel this political reptile. Our first guest is counsel at the Brennan Center for Justice, with his focus on redistricting, voting rights, and elections, Michael Li, joined by Executive Director of FairVote, a nonprofit organization advocating positive election reform and accountable governance. What an excellent concept. Robert Richie joins us. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. And Michael, I'm going to go ahead and begin with you. When we talk about gerrymandering, we've talked about this for decades. Why are we still talking about this when it seems to many people that it could have been settled decades, if not centuries ago?
Right. I mean, well, this is something that we've been doing from the very start of the country. You mentioned the 1812 gerrymander, but, you know, really, it goes really back to the founding of the country. Patrick Henry famously tried to draw a congressional district for Virginia that wouldn't elect James Madison. He wasn't successful, but even the founders apparently engaged in gerrymandering. But you're right, this is a continuing problem, in part because the Supreme Court hasn't found a workable standard for what is partisan gerrymandering. In other words, when is too much politics involved in when lines are drawn? Obviously, you can't eliminate it completely, but the question is, how do you draw that, and is that an issue for the courts? And that they've really wrestled with that and haven't come to a solution.
All right, now you use the phrase workable standard. I think that's a great place to begin here, Michael. And Robert, I'm going to ask you this as well, but Michael, let me get to you on this. What, in your opinion, then, would work as a workable standard to decide that, yes, we've got some gerrymandering happening right in front of us?
Well, you know, it's one of those things where it's easier to say I know it when I see it than to come up with a standard that works. And that's in part because in redistricting, we oftentimes disagree on what the values are. In other words, should we have competitive districts, even if that means splitting up communities to get competition, or does it mean that we try to keep communities together? And so people have focused on a lot of things, like, are districts oddly shaped? You know, what is the partisan balance? And you know, that's really one of the challenges in this whole area. And you know, lots of people have written on this. I don't know that anyone has come up with anything that's absolutely workable, but clearly lots of people recognize that this is a major problem in the country, that you know, they don't feel represented. They're disengaged from the political process, and they believe that politicians are manipulating the lines by picking their own voters.
All right, Robert, there it is, manipulation, because what we're talking about here in essence are politicians making sure that the people in the districts to which they want to be elected to fit their political affiliation, or whether it's color, whether it's race, creed, whatever. They want to make sure that they get the best possible voter there so they can assure themselves an election. It seems at surface just what Michael said, simple. You look at what the makeup is, you look at how the lines are drawn, and you can tell if somebody is specifically cherry picking. So why then can't we just set it in stone?
Well, as Michael said, there's a lot of pushes and pulls about what does fair mean. You know, is it the representation? Is it being in a competitive district? Is it representation of this group versus that group? Here's the fundamental problem. One, and I guess there's two. So one is, we should not have partisans in charge of something that should be fundamentally nonpartisan, right? So that it would be just the same way as if partisans could control who can vote and who can't vote in, you know, based on who's in charge, right? And you say, well, now only people over 50 can vote, or what have you. You know, like that kind of gerrymandering can't be done. This placement of voters is a very similar power that should not be given to partisans. So we need independent redistricting. However, the solution to the broader problem of what's fair, we think, is we've been asking the wrong question, because for us, the problem isn't so much redistricting, but really districting itself. The idea that one person can represent everybody creates these conflicts because one person can't represent everybody, and that's the fundamental.
Well, but there's a good point there, because if one person can't represent everybody, there are some people who say that gerrymandering a district always makes it safe for incumbents. Others would say that's completely a myth. It doesn't have any truth to it. Don't you have to then worry about how the individual serves the electorate instead of worrying about how the electorate fits the person who serves them? Boy, I think we just went around and around here, and we wound up chasing our tail.
Right. Well, here's what we can do, and this is actually a statutory change. We've seen this at the local level in the U.S. Some use of it at a state level, at a state legislative level, which is to go to multiple people representing you. Right. So you have the same number of representatives, but you have bigger districts and they have more than one person. And then within that district, if it's say 4 people, it'll take about a quarter of the vote to help elect someone, 50% to win 2, 75% to win 3. And you suddenly can allow more people to really actually pick their representatives, which is what we fundamentally should have. And when we think about government of the people, by the people, for the people, it means, being able to elect people to represent you in every election and change if you don't like what you have. Right now, when you have single-member districts, it's really locked in for just one side.
Michael, I've only got a couple of minutes.
No matter what we do, in like 70–80% of districts.
Okay, Michael, I've only got a couple of minutes left here, but it sounds like because of what America is, constantly people moving, districts changing, neighborhoods changing, people moving into different places, it sounds almost impossible, because then what we're talking about is basically creating a district that fits once, and then 4 years down the road, it's changed. Okay, we have to change it again, and then we have to change it again. It sounds as if that America in itself is just, it's part of the problem. When you have that melting pot, how do you find one person to represent everybody?
Yeah, I mean, clearly, fixing the redistricting process doesn't fix all of the problems. For example, in New York, it's oftentimes very hard to draw a Republican district. In Texas, where I used to live, in many places, it's very hard to draw a Republican or a Democratic district, so clearly, it doesn't fix everything. But at the same time, I think we can find better ways to do this. And these independent commissions that the Supreme Court recently validated, go a long way into helping people take back power to experiment and find ways to fix their democracy. And that's something that we should applaud the court for doing.
Well, let me ask this then, Robert, and we talked about SCOTUS and Arizona, what's happening there. Certainly there's a battle going on in Florida. With about a minute left, how do you expect things to change here? What would you expect your opinion be as to what SCOTUS will do and how then it will, quote unquote, solve anything?
What it didn't do was change things to make it worse, right? So thank goodness, right?
Thank goodness.
It could have been worse to say states can't do anything on their own, or states via the ballot measure or something that takes legislators out of the process, that might not have been constitutional, and then suddenly those states that have been doing it in a fair and less partisan way would not have been able to do that. So it didn't proactively do anything. It removes that concern that maybe a state can't do this. Now we know they can. However, I think what we need to have a conversation about is, should the People's House, the House of Representatives, truly represent us in a different way? And to do that, I think we need to rethink the single-member district, which I think it's time to do.
Sooner or later, we will stop chasing our tail on this one, and SCOTUS will then make a decision, and then, guess what? It'll start all over again. We'll still be wondering, and I have a feeling that gerrymandering, as it did in Massachusetts, will probably be with us for quite some time. Michael Li and Robert Richie, I want to thank you both for explaining it, putting it in simple terms. Gentlemen, rest assured, we'll touch on this again. My thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
All right, our pleasure. Coming up next on MidPoint, it is called a sanctuary city. How many people actually know what that means? Well, Donald Trump is the guy that started the argument, that started us thinking about it. Now, it's blown up across America. Next on MidPoint.